The great ships of the Draknari Empire filled the sky above Keth Prime like dark clouds before a storm. Commander Taejin stood on the palace balcony, his massive wings folded tight against his scaled back, the golden armor that marked his rank, as royal guard gleamed in the dying light of the twin suns. For 300 years, Taejin had served the Empire without question. He had led armies across 100 worlds. He had burned cities and conquered planets in the name of Draknari supremacy. The lesser races bowed before their might, as was proper. Dragons were the masters of the galaxy, and all others existed to serve them. But today, everything had changed. The reports lay scattered across his desk inside the palace chambers. Each one told the same horrible story. The peaceful colonies of the lunar system had not rebelled against Draknari rule as the High Council claimed. They had been wiped out completely. Men, women, children, all killed to make room for Draknari mining operations. Taejin's clawed hands trembled as he read the final report. It was written by his own soldiers, the ones he had trusted most. They described how the colonists had tried to surrender, how they had offered to share their resources, how they had begged for their lives in the end. The colonists had done nothing wrong. They had paid their taxes to the Empire. They had followed every law. They had even sent gifts to honor the Dragon Lords on their feast days. And still, they had been slaughtered like animals. Commander Taejin. The voice behind him was cold and sharp. He turned to see General Minji, his life bond mate, standing in the doorway. Her red scales caught the light, making her look like living flame. Once that sight had filled his heart with joy. Now he felt only ice. "You have read the reports," she said. It was not a question. Every word. Taejin's voice was barely a whisper. "Minji, what have we done? What have we become?" Her yellow eyes narrowed. "We have done what dragons have always done. We have taken what is ours by right of strength. The weak serve the strong. That is the way of the universe." They were innocent. Taejin roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls. They were families. They were children who had never held a weapon in their lives. They were not dragons. Minji stepped closer, her own voice rising. "They were nothing but cattle, Taejin. Resources to be used as we see fit. You have grown soft in your old age." Taejin stared at her in horror. This was the dragon he had chosen as his mate, the one he had sworn to love until the stars grew cold, the one who had once told him that mercy was a dragon's greatest strength, not weakness. "What happened to you?" he whispered. "What happened to us?" "Nothing happened," Minji said. "I simply remembered what we are. We are dragons. We are gods among insects, and insects do not matter." The next morning, Taejin stood before the High Council in the great throne room. The 5 dragon lords sat on thrones carved from single massive gems, their ancient eyes cold as winter storms. Lord Kazuki, the eldest, spoke first. "Commander Taejin, you have requested this audience to discuss the lunar operation." "I have, my lord." Taejin kept his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I believe there has been a grave mistake. The colonists were not in rebellion. They were murdered without cause." The throne room fell silent. The only sound was the distant hum of the great engines that kept the palace floating in the sky. Lord Kazuki leaned forward, his massive head tilted like a predator studying prey. "Are you questioning the wisdom of this council, Commander?" "I am questioning the murder of innocent beings, my lord." Lord Seojin, the youngest of the council, laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. "Innocent? They were not dragons. By definition, they cannot be innocent of the crime of existing. Beneath us, they were people." Taejin's control finally snapped. "They had families, dreams, hopes. They loved and laughed and cried just as we do, and we killed them for the crime of being different." The silence that followed was deafening. Lord Kazuki rose slowly from his throne, his wings spreading wide enough to cast shadows across half the room. "Commander Taejin," he said, his voice like distant thunder, "you are hereby stripped of your rank and position. You are expelled from the royal guard. You are declared traitor to the Empire. Tajin felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Everything he had ever been, everything he had ever worked for gone in an instant. Furthermore, Lord Kazuki continued, as punishment for your treason, your wings shall be clipped and you shall be exiled to prison planet Omega-7. There you will spend the remainder of your miserable existence thinking about your crimes against the Empire. 2 guards stepped forward, massive dragons in black armor. Taijin did not resist as they bound his arms with chains that burned with cold fire. He looked one last time at Minji, hoping to see some trace of the dragon he had loved. Her face was stone. The wing-clipping ceremony took place in the public square. Thousands of dragons gathered to watch as the great laser cutters sliced through the flight membranes that had carried Taijin across the stars. The pain was beyond description, but he did not cry out. He would not give them that satisfaction. As the transport ship carried him away from Keth Prime, Taijin looked back at the golden city where he had spent his entire life. The palace towers gleamed in the sunlight like jewels, beautiful and terrible. He thought of the lunar colonists. He thought of their children. He thought of all the other worlds where the same thing had happened, was happening, would happen. And he wept for the first time in centuries. Prison planet Omega-7 was a world of gray stone and red dust. The air was thin and cold, barely breathable even for a dragon. The prison itself was a massive complex of tunnels carved into the mountain rock. Guards walked the corridors day and night, their weapons always ready. Taijin was given a small cell carved from the living rock. It had a narrow window that looked out over the prison yards where thousands of beings from dozens of species worked in the mines. Humans, Altarians, vegans, Centauri, all the races the Empire had conquered, all here to be worked to death in the darkness. On his first night, as he lay on the cold stone floor of his cell, Taijin realized that his heart was not just broken. It was shattered completely, scattered like dust on an alien wind. He had lost everything. His rank, his wings, his mate, his purpose. He was no longer Commander Taijin of the Royal Guard. He was just another prisoner on a forgotten world, waiting to die. But in the darkness of that cell, as the twin moons of Omega-7 cast their pale light through his window, Taijin made a promise to himself. He would not die as the dragon he had been. Somehow, some way, he would find a path to redemption. He owed that much to the dead. 3 months passed in the gray hell of prison planet Omega-7. Taijin worked in the deep mines with the other prisoners, his clipped wings aching constantly in the cold, thin air. The guards treated him worse than the others because he was a dragon. A traitor to his own kind was lower than any alien in their eyes. Each morning brought the same routine: wake before dawn, eat the thin gruel that passed for food, march into the tunnels that went deeper into the planet's core, dig until exhaustion, sleep, repeat. Taijin kept to himself, speaking to no one. The other prisoners gave him space, unsure whether to fear or hate him more. He was a dragon, after all, member of the race that had enslaved them all. The fact that he was here meant nothing. Dragons were clever. This could be some new form of torture. But on the night of the 3rd month, everything changed. The escape attempt began just after the evening meal. A group of Altarian prisoners had been planning it for weeks, digging a tunnel from their cell block toward the outer wall. They had managed to override the door locks using parts stolen from the mining equipment. Taijin heard the alarms while lying on his cell floor, staring at the ceiling. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Guard boots thundered past his door. Shouts echoed through the stone halls in a dozen different languages. He rolled over and tried to ignore it. What did it matter to him? Let them try to escape. Let them die in the attempt. It was not his concern. But then he heard the screaming. The guards had found the tunnel. They were using shock weapons on the prisoners, the kind that caused agony beyond description. Taijin had seen those weapons used in the conquest wars. He had given the orders to use them. Something stirred in his chest. Something he thought had died completely. The screaming grew louder. Through his small window, he could see guards dragging prisoners across the yard. One of them was just a child, barely old enough to walk. An Altarian youngling with huge, terrified eyes. Tejan was on his feet before he realized he had moved. His hands pressed against the cell door, listening to the chaos outside. In all his years as a commander, he had never questioned orders. He had never cared about the suffering of the conquered, but he cared now. The escape route led through the abandoned section of the prison, where old tunnels connected to the original mining shafts. Tejan knew those tunnels. He had studied the prison plans during his first weeks here out of old military habit. The escapees would be trapped in Tunnel 7. The guards would corner them there and kill them all, unless someone warned them. Tejan began looking for a way out of his cell. Dragons were strong, but the doors were made to hold dragons. However, the ventilation grate near the ceiling was not. It took him 20 minutes of careful work to pry it loose without making noise. He squeezed through the narrow shaft, his broad shoulders scraping against the metal walls. His wings, even clipped, made the space impossibly tight. But pain was an old friend now. He pushed through. The tunnel system was a maze, but Tejan's military training served him well. He moved quickly and quietly through the darkness, following the sound of the escape attempt. Behind him, he could hear the guards spreading out, searching every tunnel. He found them in Tunnel 7, just as he had predicted. There were 12 of them, 8 adults and 4 children. Most were Altarian, with their pale blue skin and large eyes. But there were also 2 humans, a vegan, and something Tejan did not recognize. They huddled together in the narrow space, weapons improvised from mining tools clutched in their hands. One of the humans looked up as Tejan emerged from the shadows. The human was small even by human standards, with dark hair and intelligent eyes. He carried a plasma cutter like a sword, though his hands shook with fear. "Dragon," the human whispered, and the others turned to stare. Several raised their weapons. I'm not here to stop you," Tejan said quietly. "The guards are coming. This tunnel leads to a dead end." The human studied him with those sharp eyes. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I am here, and not in my cell where I belong." It was the other human who spoke next, a female with gentle hands and sad eyes. "You are the dragon they brought in 3 months ago. The traitor." "Yes. What did you do?" Tejan looked at the children huddled behind the adults. Their eyes were wide with terror. They reminded him of the reports from the lunar colonies. "I cared about people who were not dragons." The first human, the one with the plasma cutter, made a decision. "Show us another way out." Tejan nodded and turned back into the darkness. "Follow me. Stay quiet. Do not use lights until I tell you." They moved through the tunnels like ghosts. Tejan led them away from Tunnel 7, deeper into the abandoned sections of the prison. The air grew colder and thinner, but it was breathable. Behind them, the sounds of the search grew fainter. The human with the plasma cutter stayed close, to Tejan's side. "I am Kyung-soo," he said softly. "Tejan, the guards will kill us all if they catch us." "I know. They will kill you too now." Tejan looked back at the group following them. The children stayed close to the adults, their small hands clutched. "Child." "Yes. Why did you help us?" The question hung in the air between them. Tejan thought of his cell, of the safety of keeping his head down and serving his sentence quietly. He thought of Minji, of the life he had lost, of the dragon he used to be, because it was the right thing to do. They walked in silence after that, through tunnels that grew steadily warmer. Tejan led them toward the geothermal vents that heated the prison. Few guards patrolled that area because of the dangerous steam and unstable ground. The exit he had in mind was an old maintenance shaft that led to the surface, far from the main prison complex. It would put them in the wasteland beyond the walls, where survival would be difficult but possible. As they reached the final tunnel, Tejan heard something that made his blood freeze. Footsteps, heavy ones. Dragon guards, moving fast through the passages behind them. "Run," he whispered, but it was too late. The guards burst into the tunnel behind them, weapons raised. Captain Jiho, A dragon Taijin recognized from his own service years, led them. Well, well, Captain Jiho smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. The traitor dragon leads the rats to their hole. Taijin stepped in front of the prisoners, spreading his clipped wings as wide as he could. It was not much protection, but it was something. Let them go, Jiho. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with all who defy the Empire. Jiho raised his weapon. Stand aside, traitor. No. The word came out stronger than Taijin had expected. For the first time in months, he felt like himself. Again, not the broken exile in the cell, but the warrior he had once been. A warrior who had finally found something worth fighting for. Jiho's eyes narrowed. Then you will die with them. The weapon fired, a bolt of energy that could burn through steel. But Taijin was no longer standing in front of the prisoners. He was moving, faster than his clipped wings should have allowed, throwing himself at the guards. The fight was brief and brutal. Taijin was outnumbered 5-1 and his wings were useless. But the rage that had built up over 3 months of imprisonment gave him strength. He fought like the dragon he used to be, all claws and fury. When the smoke cleared, 3 guards were down. Taijin lay bleeding on the tunnel floor, but he was alive. Captain Jiho stood over him, weapon pointed at his head. Any last words, traitor? Taijin looked past him at the prisoners. Kyungsu was helping the children toward the exit shaft. The gentle human female was tending to an injured Altarian. They were going to make it to the surface. Yes, Taijin said and smiled. I am not sorry. The weapon fired. Darkness took him. But in that darkness, for the first time in months, Taijin felt something like peace. Taijin woke to the sound of gentle voices and the smell of something he had not experienced in months. Clean air. His eyes opened slowly, expecting to see the gray stone of his prison cell. Instead, he found himself looking at a ceiling made of woven metal sheets with gaps that let in natural sunlight. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through his entire body like lightning. Someone had bandaged his wounds, but they were still fresh and deep. Easy there, big guy. The voice was human and female. You took quite a beating. Taijin turned his head and saw the gentle human from the tunnel. She was sitting beside a simple bed made of salvaged materials, holding a cup of something that steamed in the cool air. You are the one who was with Kyungsu, he said, his voice rough from thirst. I am Hyeri. I am a nurse, or I was before they brought us here. She held the cup to his lips. Drink this. It is tea made from local plants. It will help with the pain. The tea was bitter but warm. As Taijin drank, he looked around what appeared to be some kind of medical shelter. Other beds held injured, prisoners both from the escape attempt and from other incidents. All were being tended by humans. Where are we? The free zone, Hyeri said. About 50 kilometers from the prison, in the mountains. The guards do not patrol this far out because the terrain is too difficult for their vehicles. Free zone. Hyeri smiled, and Taijin was surprised by how much warmth was in that smile. What the guards do not know is that not all escape attempts fail. Some of us have been building a community out here for 2 years. We help people get away from the prison and we help them survive in the wilderness. Taijin stared at her. You have been rescuing prisoners for 2 years? Humans are good at that sort of thing. This was a different voice, and Taijin looked up to see Kyungsu entering the shelter. The small human looked much better now that he was not running for his life in dark tunnels. The others from the tunnel? Taijin asked. All safe. The children are being looked after by Somin. She was a teacher before this. The adults are helping with the work around the settlement. Kyungsu pulled up a chair made from scrap metal and sat down. What I want to know is why a dragon helped us escape, and why you are still alive when Captain Jiho shot you at close range. Taijin touched his chest, where the energy blast had hit. Instead of the burned crater he expected, he found bandages and the sting of healing wounds. Dragon scales, Hyeri explained. Even clipped and beaten down, you are still tougher than most species. The energy blast knocked you unconscious and gave you some nasty burns, but it did not kill you. Jiho thought I was dead. He left me in the tunnel. We went back for you after the guards were gone, Kyung-soo said. Could not leave behind someone who risked his life to save others. Taejin looked between the two humans. They had saved him. A dragon, a member of the race that had enslaved their people and destroyed their worlds. It made no sense. Why? Because it was the right thing to do, Yeri said, and Taejin realized she was using the same words he had spoken in the tunnel. Over the following days, as his wounds healed, Taejin learned about the free zone. What he discovered amazed him more than any military victory he had ever witnessed. The settlement was built into the side of a mountain, hidden from aerial detection by natural rock, formations and metal sheets arranged to scatter sensor beams. About 300 people lived there. Humans, Altarians, vegans, and members of a dozen other species that the Empire had conquered. They had built workshops, farms, schools, even a small hospital. They recycled everything, wasted nothing, and shared what little they had with everyone who needed it. Most incredibly, they did all of this without a single weapon larger than the improvised tools they had carried during the escape. How do you defend yourselves? Taejin asked Kyung-soo as they walked through the settlement's main area. Children of different species played together in the dust while adults worked on various projects. We do not fight the Empire directly, Kyung-soo explained. We cannot win that kind of war. Instead, we hide. We help people escape. We show them that there is another way to live. They stopped at a workshop where a human named Dong-yun was working on what looked like a communications device. He had taken apart Draknari technology and put it back together in ways that Taejin had never seen before. Dong-yun is our best engineer, Kyung-soo said. Show Taejin what you are working on. Dong-yun looked up at the dragon with cautious eyes, but he spoke politely. I am modifying Draknari transmitters to send messages to other prison planets. We want to let people know that escape is possible. Taejin examined the device. The modifications were brilliant, simple but effective. This should work. The guards will not be able to trace these signals. You know Draknari technology? Dong-yun asked, surprise in his voice. I was a military commander for 300 years. The humans exchanged glances. Taejin could see them thinking the same thing. Could they trust him? Was this some elaborate trap? I understand your concern, Taejin said. I am a dragon. I am your enemy by birth. But I am also a prisoner, same as you. You are not the same as us, a new voice said. Taejin turned to see an Altarian approaching, his blue skin marked with scars from guard weapons. You are one of those who conquered our worlds. You are one of those who killed our families. The settlement grew quiet. Other people stopped their work to listen. Taejin could feel their eyes on him, could sense their fear and anger and suspicion. You are right, Taejin said. I am not the same as you. I am worse. I gave the orders that destroyed your homes. I led the armies that enslaved your people. I served the Empire without question for 3 centuries. He looked around at all the faces watching him. I cannot change what I have done. I cannot bring back the people I helped to kill. But I can tell you this. I am no longer that dragon. That dragon died in a prison cell 3 months ago. Words are easy, the Altarian said. Actions matter. Then let me prove it with actions. That afternoon, Taejin sat with Somin, the human teacher, as she worked with a group of children. The little ones were learning basic mathematics using stones and sticks as tools. In my world before the conquest, Somin said, I taught children for 20 years. Mathematics, science, history. I loved watching young minds discover new ideas. What happened to your world? Taejin asked. Somin's face grew sad. The dragons came. They said we were part of the Empire now. They took our best resources and sent them to dragon worlds. They took our smartest people to work in dragon factories. They said the rest of us could learn to serve, or we could die. And you chose to serve. I chose to survive so that I could help others survive. That is what humans do, Taejin. We endure. We adapt. We find hope in the darkest places. That evening, Taejin was invited to eat with the other residents. The meal was simple: vegetables grown in the settlement gardens, meat from small animals hunted in the mountains, bread baked from local grains. But it was the first time in months that he had eaten with others, shared food and conversation. A vegan elder named Jihan spoke of his life as a farmer before the conquest. "We grew the most beautiful fruits on our world," he said, his crystalline eyes bright with memory. "Sweet as sunlight, red as morning sky. The dragons took our farms, said they would be more efficient. Now our people work in factories, making weapons for wars they do not believe in." "I ate fruit from your world," Taejin said quietly, "in the palace on Keth Prime. I never thought about who had grown it." Jihan studied him with those strange crystalline eyes. "And now? Now I think about it every day." Later, as Taejin lay on his simple bed in the medical shelter, he thought about the day he had spent among these people. They had every reason to hate him, to kill him, to leave him to die in that tunnel. Instead, they had saved him, healed him, fed him, taught him. Yeri was working late, tending to other patients. She moved between the beds with quiet efficiency, checking wounds, adjusting blankets, offering water to those who needed it. "Why do you do this?" Taejin asked her. "Do what?" "Care for others. Even for me." Yeri sat down in the chair beside his bed. "Before the conquest, I worked in a hospital on Earth. I took an oath to help all who suffered, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The dragons may have taken my world, but they could not take my oath." "Even dragons?" "Especially dragons." She smiled. "You are the ones who need healing most of all." As Taejin drifted off to sleep, he felt something he had not experienced in months. For the first time since his exile, his dreams were not filled with nightmares of the past. Instead, he dreamed of growing things, of children learning, of people working together to build something beautiful. He dreamed of hope. 6 months had passed since Taejin joined the Free Zone community. His wounds had healed, his strength had returned, and something else had grown as well. A sense of purpose he had never felt before, even in his days as a royal guard. He worked, alongside the others, using his knowledge of Draknari military tactics to help improve their defenses and escape routes. He taught them about dragon technology, showing Dongyun and the other engineers how to modify captured equipment for peaceful purposes. But most importantly, he had learned to see the galaxy through different eyes. The morning began like any other, with the settlement's children playing in the central area, while the adults went about their daily tasks. Taejin was helping Jihan tend the vegetable gardens when the emergency alarms began to sound. Kyungsoo ran from the communications center, his face pale with fear. Long-range sensors show a massive fleet approaching the planet. Dragon ships, hundreds of them. The settlement erupted into controlled chaos. This was what they had all feared and prepared for, the day the Empire decided to end the Free Zone permanently. "How long do we have?" Soman asked, gathering the children close to her. "Maybe 6 hours before they reach orbit," Dongyun said, checking his instruments. "Less than that before they start bombardment." Taejin felt ice form in his stomach. He knew how these operations worked. The Empire would not bother with ground troops or careful searches. They would simply burn the entire continent from space and be done with it. "We need to evacuate," he said. "Everyone, immediately." "Evacuate where?" asked the Altarian who had confronted Taejin months earlier. His name was Baekhyun, and he had slowly come to trust the dragon over time. "There is nowhere on this planet they cannot reach." Taejin was already moving toward the communications center. "Not nowhere. The old mining platforms in the asteroid belt. If we can reach them, we can hide until the fleet moves on. That is, hundreds of thousands of kilometers away," Kyungsoo said. "Our ships cannot make that journey with everyone aboard. Then we make multiple trips." But even as he said it, Taejin knew there was not enough time. The settlement had over 300 people, including many children and elderly. Their few small ships could carry maybe 50 at a time. In the communications center, Dongyun was frantically working the modified Draknari transmitters. "I am picking up Empire communications," he said. They are calling this Operation Final. Solution: complete elimination of all resistance elements on Omega-7. Tijin grabbed the transmitter. The command frequencies were ones he knew from his years of service. As he listened, his worst fears were confirmed. They are not just targeting the free zone, he said, his voice grim. They are planning to destroy the entire prison complex as well. Every prisoner, every guard, everyone on the planet. Hieri went white. But there are 50,000 people in that prison. The Empire has decided that Omega-7 is too much trouble to maintain. Taijin's claws dug into the metal table. They would rather kill everyone and start fresh somewhere else. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the communications center stared at the radio, processing what they had just heard. We have to warn them, Sumin said quietly. The prisoners, the guards, everyone. They have a right to know what is coming. And then what? Baekhyun asked. We cannot save them all. We can try. The voice was Taejin's, and it surprised him as much as it surprised the others. 300 years of military training told him it was impossible. The logical thing to do was save who they could and abandon the rest, but he was no longer the dragon who followed logic above all else. I know the prison layout better than anyone, he continued. I know their defenses, their weaknesses, their emergency procedures. If we can get word to the prisoners, coordinate with them, we might be able to organize a mass evacuation. That is insane, Donghyun said. We do not have the ships, the time, or the resources. Then we make do with what we have. Taijin looked around at the faces of the people who had become his family. 6 months ago, you saved a dragon who had no right to expect mercy. Today, let us save everyone we can. Kyungsoo stepped forward. What do you need? The plan they developed over the next 2 hours was desperate and probably doomed to fail, but it was better than doing nothing. Taejin would return to the prison complex, using his knowledge of the security systems to get inside and organize the prisoners. Donghyun would use the settlement's modified transmitters to jam Empire communications and coordinate the escape ships. Hyeri and Soman would organize the evacuation of the free zone, focusing on getting the children to safety first. What about you? Hyeri asked Taijin as he prepared to leave. How will you get out of the prison once the evacuation begins? Taejin checked the weapon he had taken from the settlement's small armory, a modified mining laser that could cut through dragon armor. I will find a way. She grabbed his arm as he turned to go. Taejin, promise me you will not do anything stupid. He looked down at her small human hand on his scaled arm. 6 months ago, the touch would have meant nothing to him. Now it meant everything. I promise I will do everything I can to come back to you. It was not the promise she wanted, but it was the only one he could give. The journey to the prison took 3 hours through the mountain passes. Taijin traveled alone, moving as quickly as his clipped wings would allow. Behind him, he could see the glow of the free zone as the evacuation ships began their desperate flights to the asteroid belt. The prison complex was in chaos when he arrived. Word of the approaching fleet had somehow reached the guards, and they were preparing for evacuation, taking only essential personnel and leaving the prisoners to die. Taijin watched from the shadows as transport ships loaded with dragon guards lifted off from the landing pads. Soon only a skeleton crew would remain to maintain basic systems until the bombardment began. He made his move just after sunset, slipping through the outer defenses using routes he had memorized during his months of imprisonment. The tunnels were familiar territory, and his knowledge of Draknari security systems allowed him to avoid the automated sensors. The first prisoners he contacted were in the maximum security block, political prisoners and resistance leaders who had been captured in recent raids. They listened to his warning with grim acceptance. We always knew this day would come, said a human named Chanwu, who had led the resistance on his homeworld. The only question was whether we would die fighting or die cowering in our cells. Today we choose to fight. Word spread through the prison like wildfire. Prisoners who had given up hope suddenly found purpose. Old enemies worked together. Plans were made in whispered conversations in the darkness. But as the hours passed, it became clear that the evacuation was not going as planned. The few transport ships they had commandeered could not carry everyone. The Empire fleet was arriving. ahead of schedule. Time was running out. That was when Taejin heard a familiar voice on the guard communication channels. "This is General Minji of the Expeditionary Fleet. We are accelerating the bombardment schedule. Begin orbital strikes in 1 hour." Taejin's blood turned to ice. Minji was here. His former mate, the dragon who had once loved him, was commanding the fleet that would destroy everyone on this planet. In the communications room he had seized, Taejin activated the long-range transmitter. If he was going to die, there were things that needed to be said. "General Minji, this is former Commander Taejin. I know you can hear me." The channel was quiet for a long moment. Then her voice came through, cold as the space between stars. "Taejin, I should have known you would be involved in this resistance nonsense. Minji, there are 50,000 people on this planet. Prisoners, guards, civilians. You are about to commit genocide. I am about to remove a problem that has existed too long." Her voice carried no emotion at all. "You should have stayed in your cell and died quietly, old friend. These people are not your enemies, they are just trying to survive. They are not dragons. Their survival is irrelevant." Taejin closed his eyes, remembering the dragon he had once loved. That dragon was gone, replaced by something cold and merciless. "Then I suppose we have nothing more to say to each other." "No, we do not." The transmission ended. An hour later, the first orbital strikes began, turning the night sky into a blazing hell of fire and death. But in the tunnels beneath the prison, 50,000 people were no longer alone. They had hope, they had a plan, and they had a dragon who had remembered what it meant to protect instead of destroy. The real battle was just beginning. The bombardment from space lit up the night sky like a second sun. Explosions rocked the prison complex as energy beams from the Empire fleet carved burning scars across the planet's surface. In the deep tunnels beneath the complex, 50,000 beings huddled together and waited. Taejin stood in the main tunnel intersection, coordinating the desperate evacuation effort through a handheld communicator. Around him, humans and Altarians and Vegans and dozens of other species worked together, carrying children, helping the injured, sharing what little supplies they had. "Transport 7 is away." Donghyun's voice crackled through the communicator from his position at the makeshift spaceport 3 kilometers away. "That is 800 more people to safety, but we are running out of ships." Taejin checked his mental count. They had evacuated nearly 30,000 people over the past 6 hours, using every transport they could steal or commandeer. But 20,000 remained and the bombardment was getting stronger. "Status on the asteroid base?" Taejin asked. "Kyungsoo reports they are setting up emergency shelters," came Hyeri's voice. She was coordinating the refugee reception from the mining platforms in the asteroid belt. "But they are overcrowded and running low on supplies." A massive explosion shook the tunnels, sending dust and rocks cascading from the ceiling. Somewhere, above them, another section of the prison complex had been reduced to molten slag. "Sir!" A young human prisoner named Minho ran up to Taejin, his face streaked with dirt and fear. "The north tunnel is collapsing. We have 3,000 people trapped in that section." Taejin felt his heart sink. The north tunnel was the deepest part of the complex, where they had moved the most vulnerable prisoners, the sick, the elderly, the children. If that section was cut off, those people would die when the bombardment reached the lower levels. "Can we dig them out?" "Not in time. The whole area is unstable." Taejin looked around at the faces surrounding him. 6 months ago, these people had been strangers, members of species he had been taught to see as inferior. Now they looked to him for hope, for leadership, for salvation. He thought of Kyungsoo, safely coordinating from the asteroid base. He thought of Hyeri, tending to refugees in the makeshift shelters. He thought of Somin and all the children she had saved. They were alive because ordinary people had refused to give up, had chosen compassion over despair. "There is another way," Taejin said slowly. "The old geothermal vents run directly under the north section. If someone could reach the main control station and redirect the steam flow, it would clear the collapse and create an evacuation route." "Where is the control station?" Minho asked. "Level 15, Section C, right under the area taking the heaviest bombardment." The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. It was a suicide mission. No one could survive up there. No one except a dragon. I need you to coordinate the final evacuations, Taijin told the group of resistance leaders around him. Get everyone else to the ships, do not wait for me. Chanwu, the human resistance fighter, grabbed his arm. Taijin, that is insane. You will not survive up there. Maybe. Maybe not. Taijin checked his weapon and the portable toolkit he had taken from the engineering section. But those 3,000 people definitely will not survive down here. Was already moving toward the access shaft that led to the upper levels. Behind him, he could hear Minho trying to coordinate the evacuation of the remaining prisoners. The young human had learned much about leadership in the past few hours. The journey upward was a nightmare of heat, smoke, and falling debris. The prison complex was being systematically destroyed from above, level by level. Taijin's clipped, wings ached in the superheated air, but he pressed on. Level 10 was a blazing ruin. Level 12 was completely gone, open to the burning sky above. Level 15, when he finally reached it, was like the surface of a star. The control station was exactly where he remembered it, a heavily armored booth designed to withstand the heat of the geothermal system, but the path to reach it was blocked by twisted metal and burning debris. Taijin forced his way through, his dragon scales protecting him from the worst of the heat. Energy beams from the fleet above lanced down through the wreckage, missing him by meters. He could hear Minji's voice on the guard channels directing the bombardment with clinical precision. The control panel was a maze of Draknari engineering, but Taijin had spent centuries working with such systems. His claws danced over the controls, redirecting steam pressure, opening emergency vents, creating the pathway that would save 3,000 lives. As he worked, his communicator crackled with voices from below. North Tunnel is clearing. Someone shouted, "The evacuation route is open!" "Transport 12 is loading now," came Donghyun's voice. "We can get them all out." Taijin smiled as he finished the sequence that would keep the vents open long enough for the evacuation. Around him, the control station was beginning to buckle under the heat and bombardment. He had maybe minutes before this entire level collapsed. His communicator buzzed with an incoming message on a command frequency. Minji's voice filled the burning chamber. "Taijin, I know you are still down there. My sensors show the geothermal systems have been activated." "Hello, Minji. You cannot save them all, you know. Even if you evacuate the prison, there is nowhere in the galaxy they can hide from the Empire. Maybe, but they will be free to try." There was a long pause. When Minji spoke again, her voice was softer, almost like the dragon he had once loved. "Why, Taijin? Why throw your life away for these creatures?" Taijin looked around at the burning ruins of the level. Through the holes in the ceiling, he could see the stars beyond the smoke and fire. Somewhere up there, in stolen ships and makeshift shelters, 50,000 people were escaping to freedom. Because they are not creatures, Minji. They are people. They have families, dreams, hopes. They love and laugh and cry just as we do. I learned that from them. You are a fool, maybe, but I am a fool who learned how to be more than just a dragon. Another massive explosion shook the level, and Taijin could hear the final supports beginning to give way. Through his communicator, he heard Donghyun's voice. "That is everyone, all transports away. Taijin, we are coming back for you." "Negative," Taijin said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Too dangerous. Get everyone to safety." "Taijin." It was Hieri's voice now, transmitted from the asteroid base. "Do not you dare give up. We need you." He closed his eyes, thinking of the gentle human who had first tended his wounds, who had shown him what healing looked like. "Take care of them, Hieri. All of them." The level collapsed in a roar of fire and falling stone. But by then, the last transport ship was already disappearing into the star-filled darkness, carrying its precious cargo to safety. 5 years later, on a small world at the edge of known space, children of a dozen different species played together in gardens that grew food for their families. Humans and Altarians and Vegans worked side by side, building something that had never existed before, a true democracy where every voice mattered. Yeri stood in the doorway of the school, watching Soman teach a class of young ones about the history of the galaxy. The children listened with wide eyes as she told them about the old empire, about the prisons and the slavery and the fear. "But teacher," asked a small Altarian girl, "how did our parents escape from the bad dragons?" Soman smiled. "They had help from a very special dragon, one who learned that true strength comes not from conquering others, but from protecting them." "Where is the good dragon now?" Soman looked out the window at the memorial statue in the center of the settlement. A dragon with outstretched wings, not in dominance but in protection. The inscription at the base read simply, "Taejin, he chose love." "He is still with us," Somin said softly. "Every time we help someone in need, every time we choose compassion over hatred, every time we build instead of destroy, he is there." The children nodded solemnly and then ran outside to play in the gardens where hope grew like flowers in the alien soil. Across the galaxy, the old empire had fallen, brought down by the very people it had tried to enslave. In its place rose something new, a confederation of free worlds where beings of all species could live in peace. And in the records of that new government, on a page of honor reserved for the greatest heroes, there was written the story of a dragon with a broken heart who found someone who saved him, and in saving him taught him how to save others. The heart that had been shattered in a prison cell had been rebuilt, piece by piece, by the kindness of those who had every reason to hate him. And when the time came, that healed heart had the strength to break again, this time by choice to save those who could not save themselves. In the end, Taejin had learned the greatest truth of all, that love shared is love multiplied, and that even the smallest act of compassion can change the course of history. The dragon with the broken heart had indeed found someone who saved him. But what he discovered was that sometimes the act of being saved means learning how to save others, and that was the greatest salvation of all.